A Hell's Angel saw a woman crying on a blind date. His words changed everything. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of Mario's Italian restaurant, catching on the polished silverware and wine glasses that adorned each table. Luke stood outside, his reflection in the restaurant's window making him grimace. He tugged at the collar of his crisp white shirt, feeling like it was choking him despite being the right size. The leather jacket he wore over it, his second skin really, felt like armor against the fancy atmosphere he was about to enter. "Get it together," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his dark hair that he'd actually combed for once. His fingers brushed against the small silver hoop in his ear, and he debated taking it out. But no, he was who he was, blind date or not. The hostess's eyes widened slightly as he pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Luke was used to that reaction. His broad shoulders and tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves tended to have that effect on people. But to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "Yeah, table for two. Under Luke Davidson." The words felt strange in his mouth. He usually grabbed burgers at diners or beers at the local bar with his motorcycle club brothers. This whole setup, the cloth napkins, the soft classical music, the fancy menu written in Italian, made him feel like a bull in a china shop. "Right this way, sir." The hostess led him to a corner table, partially hidden behind a decorative plant. Luke wondered if she was trying to keep him out of sight of the other patrons. He sat down, his back to the wall, old habits die hard, and tried not to fidget with the fancy napkin. The waiter appeared almost immediately, asking if he'd like something to drink while he waited. "Just water," Luke said, then added, "Thanks." His mother had taught him manners, even if he didn't use them much these days. As he waited, Luke found himself tapping his foot against the floor, a nervous rhythm that earned him a few glances from nearby tables. He forced himself to stop. What was he doing here anyway? A blind date? He couldn't remember the last time he'd been on any kind of date, let alone one set up by his well-meaning sister. "She's perfect for you," his sister had insisted. "She's different. Give it a chance." Different how? Luke wondered, watching the entrance. The restaurant was filling up now, couples and families filing in, all of them looking like they belonged here. Unlike him. The door opened again, and this time, a woman walked in, who made Luke sit up straighter. She was elegant in a simple navy dress, her silver hair styled softly around her face. She paused just inside the door, her eyes scanning the restaurant. When they landed on Luke, he saw the slight widening of surprise, the small step backward she nearly took. Luke's heart sank. He knew that look too, the one that said she was already regretting coming here. He watched as she visibly gathered herself, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. She walked toward his table with measured steps. "Luke?" she asked, her voice gentle but uncertain. He stood up quickly, too quickly, his knee bumping the table and making the water glasses rattle. "Yeah, that's me. You must be Evelyn?" "Yes." She offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's nice to meet you." They both sat down, the silence between them thick with awkwardness. Luke cleared his throat. "Thanks for coming," he managed, wincing at how formal the words sounded. "Thank you for the invitation," Evelyn responded automatically, her fingers nervously adjusting her napkin. The waiter appeared at their table, pen poised over his notepad. Luke cleared his throat. "I'll have a beer. Whatever's on tap is fine." "And for the lady?" the waiter asked, turning to Evelyn. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the menu. Just a glass of white wine, please. House wine is fine." As the waiter walked away, silence settled over their table again. Evelyn found herself studying Luke's hands, strong, calloused, with a few faded scars across the knuckles. Her eyes traveled to the tattoos peeking out from beneath his sleeve, intricate designs that disappeared under the leather jacket. Luke shifted in his seat, aware of her scrutiny. "Listen, I know I'm probably not what you were expecting." "No," Evelyn interrupted softly, then offered a small smile. "But then again, blind dates rarely are what we expect, are they?" Luke's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Can't say I've been on many to compare." Their drinks arrived, and Evelyn took a small sip of her wine, grateful for something to do with her hands. "My friend Sarah, she's the one who suggested this. She thought it would be good for me to get out more." "My sister," Luke said, gesturing with his beer bottle. "She's always trying to fix my life." There was fondness in his gruff voice that made Evelyn look at him more closely. "It's been a while since I've done anything like this," Evelyn admitted. "My husband—" She paused, taking another sip of wine. "David passed away 3 years ago." Luke set his beer down, his full attention on her now. There was something in his quiet presence that made her continue. "We were married for 32 years, she said, her voice growing softer. "He was a high school teacher, English literature. He loved poetry, would read it to me in the mornings over coffee." A small laugh escaped her, though it wavered. "He even proposed with a poem he'd written himself. It was terrible, really, but so earnest." She looked down at her wedding ring, which she still wore. "We had plans, you know. We were going to travel more after he retired. He wanted to see Venice, walk through all those narrow streets." Her voice cracked slightly. "He had a heart attack while grading papers one evening. I found him at his desk." Luke didn't speak, but his blue eyes held hers steadily. He gave a small nod, encouraging her to continue if she wanted to. There was no pity in his expression, just quiet understanding. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, reaching for her napkin. "This isn't exactly proper first date conversation, is it?" Luke shook his head. "It's fine. It's real." His voice was softer than she expected it to be. Something in his response, in the gentle way he said it, made Evelyn's tense shoulders relax. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was a steadiness to Luke that felt safe. She found herself wanting to tell him more, which surprised her. She hadn't talked about David to anyone new in a long time. The waiter approached their table again, ready to take their dinner orders, but Evelyn barely noticed him. She was too busy realizing that for the first time in a long while, she felt comfortable sharing her grief with someone who seemed content just to listen. The waiter took their orders and disappeared, leaving them in a comfortable silence. Evelyn's fingers twisted the napkin in her lap, creating small creases in the crisp white fabric. "Some days," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "the house feels so empty I can hardly breathe." She smoothed the napkin, then started folding it again. "I still catch myself setting 2 places at the table sometimes, or turning to tell David something funny I saw on TV." Luke leaned forward slightly, his broad shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself less imposing. The leather of his jacket creaked softly with the movement. "The worst part is—" Evelyn stopped, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't burden you with all this." Her hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "You're not burdening anyone," Luke said quietly. He took a long breath, then added, "I know something about loss, too." Evelyn looked up, surprised by the gentle tone in his voice. The tough biker exterior seemed to soften around the edges. "About 8 years ago," he continued, his fingers tracing the condensation on his beer bottle, "there was someone, Maria." He spoke the name with careful tenderness, like handling something fragile. She worked at this little coffee shop I used to stop at every morning. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find a Hell's Angel, right? A small smile touched Evelyn's lips as she watched him. The overhead light caught the silver in his beard as he spoke. We dated for 2 years. She was different. Saw past all this. He gestured to his leather jacket and tattoos. She had this way of laughing that made everything feel lighter, you know? Even on the worst days. Luke paused, taking a sip of his beer. She got sick. Cancer. It happened fast. 3 months from diagnosis to... He left the sentence unfinished. I spent every day at the hospital. My brothers in the club thought I was going soft, but I didn't care. I just wanted to hear her laugh one more time. Evelyn's hand moved across the table, almost touching his before pulling back. I'm so sorry, Luke. He nodded, meeting her eyes. What I'm trying to say is, I get it. That emptiness you talked about, the way everything feels wrong, like the world shifted 2 inches to the left. I know that feeling. How did you... Evelyn swallowed hard. How did you handle it? Badly, at first, Luke admitted with a slight grimace. Rode my bike too fast. Picked fights I shouldn't have. Then one day I'm sitting at this traffic light, and this song comes on the radio, one she used to sing all the time in that terrible off-key voice of hers. He smiled at the memory. And I just started laughing. Right there at the light, because I could finally remember her voice without it hurting so much. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest as she listened to him. The man sitting across from her wasn't the intimidating biker she'd first seen. He was someone who understood the weight she carried, who'd walked a similar path. It's still there, Luke said softly. That missing piece. But it gets... not easier, exactly. More familiar, maybe. Like an old scar that only aches when it rains. Evelyn nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. For the first time since walking into the restaurant, she felt truly seen. Their entrees arrived, steam rising from the plates as the waiter set them down. Evelyn stared at her grilled salmon, pushing a piece of asparagus around with her fork. The comfortable silence they'd shared earlier had given way to something heavier. David and I, she started, her voice catching slightly. We used to come here sometimes, on special occasions. She gestured vaguely at the restaurant's warm lighting and brick walls. He always ordered the steak, medium rare, with extra mushrooms. Luke set down his knife and fork, giving her his full attention. The leather of his jacket creaked as he shifted in his chair. The last time we were here... Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. It was our 32nd anniversary. 6 months before he... She pressed her lips together, trying to steady herself. The buzz of conversations around them seemed to fade away as Evelyn continued. You know what's strange? Sometimes I forget what his voice sounded like. Her eyes grew glassy. I have videos, of course, but it's not the same. The way he'd call my name from across the house, or how he'd hum while doing the dishes. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light before falling onto the white tablecloth. She quickly reached up to wipe it away, but more followed. I'm sorry, she whispered, fumbling in her purse for a tissue. This is embarrassing. Luke sat there, his weathered face showing concern but uncertainty. He shifted in his chair, opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. His large hands, marked with familiar biker tattoos, moved restlessly on the table. I shouldn't be crying on a blind date, Evelyn said, trying to laugh through her tears. What you must think of me. I think, Luke started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his graying beard, clearly struggling to find the right words. I mean, it's okay to... He faltered again. Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with the tissue, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Luke took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, His voice was low and earnest. Strength doesn't come from being tough. It comes from letting yourself feel. Evelyn's hands stilled, the tissue forgotten in her fingers. She looked up at him, really looked at him, seeing past the leather and tattoos to something deeper. His words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Her tears began to slow as she absorbed what he'd said. This man, who looked like he could handle himself in any bar fight, had just given her permission to be vulnerable in a way no one else had since David died. "Thank you," she said softly, meeting his steady gaze. That's very kind." She smiled slightly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes despite their redness. "And surprisingly wise for a Hell's Angel." Evelyn reached for her glass of water, taking a small sip to compose herself. Her fingers were steadier now as she smoothed her napkin across her lap. The restaurant's soft lighting seemed kinder, somehow, after Luke's unexpected words of wisdom. "I suppose I should explain," she said, managing a faint smile. Her lipstick had smudged slightly from wiping her tears, but she didn't seem to notice. "It's just that grief has been such a big part of my life lately, not just personally, but professionally too." Luke raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. The candlelight flickered across his weathered face, softening the hard edges. "You see," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger, "I'm an author." She paused, watching his expression. "My latest book, well, it's about loss and healing, about finding your way through grief." Her fingers traced the rim of her water glass. "It actually became a bestseller last month." Luke's jaw dropped. His fork clattered against his plate, drawing curious glances from nearby diners. The tough biker image disappeared for a moment, as genuine surprise spread across his face. You're E.J. Matthews?" Now it was Evelyn's turn to look surprised. "You know my pen name?" Luke's weathered hands fumbled with the zipper of his leather jacket. From an inner pocket, he pulled out a well-worn paperback, its corners softened from frequent handling. The cover was familiar to Evelyn. She'd spent weeks arguing with her publisher about the design. The title, "After the Light Fades," gleamed in silver letters against a backdrop of a setting sun. "I've been carrying this around for months," Luke admitted, his voice gruff with emotion. He placed the book carefully on the table between them. "Never thought I'd be sitting across from the person who wrote it." Evelyn stared at her own book, noting the dog-eared pages and the crack in the spine that showed it had been opened many times. You've read it." "3 times, Luke said, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "Your words about loss, about feeling like you're drowning but learning to swim again?" He trailed off, looking almost embarrassed. "They hit home." A soft laugh escaped Evelyn's lips, not mocking but filled with wonder. "I never would have thought—" She gestured at his leather jacket, his tattoos. "I mean, you don't exactly look like my typical reader." "Guess we both learned not to judge by appearances tonight," Luke said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the space between them. The initial awkwardness of their blind date dissolved into something deeper, a mutual understanding born from shared experiences with pain and healing. "The chapter about the empty chair at the dinner table," Luke said quietly. "That one got to me the most." Evelyn nodded, remembering the weeks it had taken her to write that particular passage, how many tears had fallen on her keyboard. "It's the little things that hurt the most, isn't it? The everyday moments when you turn to share something and—" She trailed off, but this time her eyes remained dry. The restaurant's dinner crowd had thinned, leaving their corner more private. Luke traced the edge of his coffee cup with a calloused finger, his earlier nervousness replaced by a thoughtful expression. Your book, he said, his voice low and measured. That part about feeling trapped behind walls you built yourself. He cleared his throat. Made me think about my own life. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her own dessert forgotten. How so? Luke's fingers drummed against the table for a moment before he continued. In my world, the biker world, everyone's got this image to maintain. Tough guys, you know? He gestured to his leather jacket. We ride together, drink together, always surrounded by people, but... He paused, searching for words. But you still feel alone, Evelyn finished softly. Yeah, Luke nodded, relief crossing his face at being understood. It's like wearing a mask all the time. Can't show weakness, can't let anyone see beneath the surface. He gave a hollow laugh. Pretty messed up, right? Evelyn shook her head. Not at all. In your book, my book, I mean, I wrote about grief being like armor. We wear it to protect ourselves, but sometimes it just keeps us from really connecting with people. That's exactly it. Luke's eyes lit up with recognition. After my dad died, I threw myself into the club life. Thought if I could just be tough enough, nothing would hurt anymore. He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. But reading your words about loss, about learning to live with the pain instead of fighting it, it hit different. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, touched by his honesty. It's strange, isn't it? How loss can make us build these walls, yet somehow also create bridges to others who understand? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding between them. The waiter quietly cleared their plates, and Evelyn noticed how the evening had slipped away without her usual anxiety about dating. But with that realization came another wave of emotion. Guilt, fear, uncertainty. She twisted her napkin in her lap, gathering courage. Luke, she began carefully, I need to be honest about something. She met his eyes, finding them patient and attentive. This evening has been unexpected, in the best way possible. You're nothing like I assumed you'd be, and talking with you has felt so natural. Luke nodded, waiting for her to continue. But, Evelyn took a deep breath. I'm not ready for a romantic relationship. My heart is it's still healing. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. I hope you understand. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or heavy. Instead, Luke's expression softened with understanding. He reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to gently push her book back toward her. Hey, he said, his voice gentle but firm. No pressure? Sometimes talking is enough, you know? He tapped the book's cover. You taught me that. In here. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. Thank you, she whispered. For understanding. Luke nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Like you wrote, healing takes its own time. Can't rush it. The night air had cooled considerably as they stepped out of the restaurant. Street lamps cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees lining the street. Evelyn wrapped her light cardigan tighter around her shoulders as they walked toward the parking lot. Luke's motorcycle stood apart from the cars, its chrome gleaming under the lights. He'd parked it away from other vehicles, a habit born from years of protecting his pride and joy. As they approached, Evelyn found herself studying the machine with newfound interest, seeing it not as an intimidating symbol, but as an extension of the complex man she'd come to know over dinner. She's beautiful, Evelyn said, surprising herself with the comment. Your bike, I mean. Luke's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Thanks. Built her myself, piece by piece. He ran a hand along the handlebars, his touch gentle despite his rough exterior. Took 3 years to get her just right. That's quite a commitment, Evelyn observed, noting how his dedication to the bike revealed another layer of his character. Patience, craftsmanship, care. Yeah, well. Luke shuffled his feet, suddenly looking bashful. Sometimes the things worth having take time, you know? The words hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond motorcycle restoration. Evelyn felt that familiar ache in her chest, not as sharp as before, but present nonetheless. The evening had been so different from what she'd expected, filled with surprising moments of connection and understanding. "Luke," she said softly, turning to face him. The street lamp cast shadows across his face, softening his usually tough features. "I want to thank you for tonight, for listening, for understanding." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "For showing me that strength can come in different forms." Luke nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions she couldn't quite read. "You don't have to thank me. Your book, it helped me understand some things about myself too." Evelyn stepped closer, her heart full of gratitude for this unexpected friendship. She reached up and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek, the gesture both an ending and a beginning. "I'm still healing," she whispered as she pulled back. "But tonight made me feel less alone in that journey." Luke stood still for a moment, touched by her gesture. Then his face broke into a gentle smile, not his usual guarded expression, but something more genuine and warm. "You know," he said, running a hand through his hair, "I'm not looking for romance either. Got my own healing to do, I guess." He met her eyes. "But friendship, that I could use, especially with someone who understands what it's like to wear armor." Evelyn felt relief wash over her at his words. "Friendship," she repeated, tasting the word. "I'd like that." They stood there for a moment longer, two souls who'd found an unexpected connection in their shared understanding of loss and healing. The night breeze carried the faint sound of distant traffic, a reminder that the world continued its normal pace around them, even as something significant had shifted in their own lives. "Drive safe," Evelyn said finally, stepping back. Luke swung his leg over his motorcycle, the engine rumbling to life beneath him. He gave her one last smile, a real one that reached his eyes, before pulling on his helmet. They parted ways, each carrying with them the warmth of their unexpected bond, neither pushing for more than what this evening had already given them. Luke rolled over in bed, squinting at the sunlight streaming through his bedroom window. His digital clock blinked 7:15 a.m., earlier than he usually woke up. The memories of last night's date floated through his mind, making it impossible to fall back asleep. He sat up, running his hands over his face. His leather jacket hung on the back of a chair, a reminder of how different he'd felt walking into that restaurant. The tough exterior he'd worn for years had felt like a shield, but somehow Evelyn had seen right through it. "Get it together," he muttered to himself, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His small apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of morning traffic. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but something felt different. He felt different. Walking to the bathroom, Luke caught his reflection in the mirror. The same tattoos marked his arms, the same rough features stared back at him, but his eyes held a softness he wasn't used to seeing. Evelyn's tears had touched something in him, awakened feelings he'd buried deep beneath his Hell's Angels persona. After a quick shower, Luke found himself drawn to his bedside table. Evelyn's book lay there, dog-eared and well-worn. He'd been reading it every night for weeks, finding comfort in her words about loss and healing. Now, knowing the woman behind those words, the book felt even more precious. He picked it up, thumbing through the familiar pages. Certain passages jumped out at him, ones he'd read over and over. They hit differently now that he could hear them in her voice, could picture the pain behind her eyes as she'd talked about her husband. "Strength doesn't come from being tough," he repeated his own words from last night, shaking his head at how they'd just tumbled out of him. He'd meant them, though. Years in the club had taught him that the toughest guys were often the ones hurting the most inside. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since their dinner. The local diner called to him, a place where he could sit and think without the distractions of home. Grabbing his keys and jacket, Luke headed out into the morning air. The familiar bell above Joe's diner chimed as he pushed through the door. The usual morning crowd barely looked up. They were used to seeing him here. Luke slid into his regular booth by the window, nodding at Sally, the waitress who already knew his order. As he waited for his coffee, Luke found his thoughts drifting back to Evelyn. The way she'd kissed his cheek before leaving, so gentle and thankful. It hadn't felt romantic. It had felt like understanding, like acceptance. He touched the spot absently, remembering how vulnerable she'd looked sharing her story. Sally appeared with his coffee and eggs, giving him a curious look. "You're awful quiet this morning, Luke. Everything okay?" "Yeah," he replied, managing a small smile. "Just thinking." Alone again, he pulled Evelyn's book from his jacket pocket. He'd grabbed it without thinking, like a comfort object. Opening to where he'd left off, Luke began reading while he ate. The words felt richer now, deeper. He could see the strength it must have taken to write them, to share such raw pain with the world. A wave of respect washed over him as he read. Evelyn wasn't just another author writing about grief. She was living it, breathing it, and still finding ways to help others through their own pain. That took a different kind of courage than anything he'd learned in the club. Morning shadows. Evelyn's house stood silent in the early morning light. Sunbeams filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors she and Tom had picked out together 15 years ago. Her footsteps echoed through the empty rooms as she made her way downstairs, each step a reminder of the life that once filled this space. In the living room, Tom's photograph caught the morning light. His warm smile, frozen in time, watched over the room from its place on the mantel. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the frame, her fingers tracing the familiar outline. "Morning, my love," she whispered, a daily ritual that brought both comfort and pain. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual, perhaps because of last night's unexpected connection with Luke. She'd opened up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone since Tom's passing. Her writing desk sat in the corner by the bay window, exactly where Tom had helped her position it years ago. "The light's perfect here," he'd said. "You'll write your best stories in this spot." The memory brought a sad smile to her face as she settled into her chair. The laptop hummed to life, and Evelyn opened her work-in-progress document. The cursor blinked accusingly on the blank page, waiting for words that wouldn't come. She'd been stuck on this chapter for weeks, trying to capture the essence of moving forward after loss, but her own grief kept getting in the way. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The words used to flow so easily, especially when writing about Tom. But now, after sharing her story with Luke, everything felt different. More raw. More real. The professional distance she'd maintained in her writing seemed impossible to recreate. Hours ticked by. Evelyn managed a few paragraphs, but each sentence felt forced, hollow. She deleted more than she kept. The coffee beside her grew cold, untouched. Outside, the morning turned to afternoon, but inside, time seemed frozen. The ping of an incoming email broke her concentration. Her publisher's name in the subject line made her heart skip a beat. She'd submitted the first few chapters of her new book last week, hoping they would see the same potential she did in this new direction. With trembling fingers, Evelyn clicked open the email. The formal tone hit her first, so different from the warm encouragement she'd received for her previous work. Her eyes scanned the words. Unfortunately, not quite what we're looking for. Doesn't capture the same emotional depth. The rejection settled heavy in her chest. She read the email again, each word cutting deeper. They wanted another book about raw grief, about the immediate aftermath of loss. They didn't want her story of healing, of trying to move forward. Evelyn's gaze drifted to Tom's photograph. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling up. "I thought I could do this. I thought I was strong enough." The words caught in her throat as she closed her laptop, unable to look at the rejection letter any longer. The house felt colder now, emptier. The silence that had been her companion for so long suddenly felt suffocating. She'd poured her heart into this new book, believing it would help others find their way through grief, just as she was trying to do. Now, sitting alone in the growing shadows of afternoon, Evelyn wondered if she had any strength left to keep writing at all. The letter, the neon signs at Joe's bar cast their usual red glow across Luke's weathered face as he pushed through the heavy wooden door. The familiar smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke wrapped around him like an old blanket. A few regulars nodded in his direction, but tonight felt different. His mind wasn't on small talk or sharing stories about life on the road. "The usual," Joe called from behind the bar, already reaching for a bottle. Luke shook his head. "Just coffee tonight, Joe? And maybe some paper and a pen?" Joe's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't comment. He disappeared into the back office and returned with a legal pad and a ballpoint pen. Luke chose a quiet corner booth, away from the jukebox and the usual crowd. The blank yellow paper stared back at him. Luke hadn't written a letter since he couldn't remember when. His rough hands, more used to gripping handlebars than pens, felt clumsy as he started writing. "Dear Evelyn," he began, then stopped. The words jumbled in his head. He thought about her tears at dinner, about the pain in her voice when she talked about her husband. He thought about the rejection letter she'd mentioned in their brief phone conversation yesterday. Luke took a long sip of coffee, ignoring the curious glances from the other patrons. They'd never seen the tough biker sitting alone, hunched over paper like a schoolboy writing an essay. But something about Evelyn's situation wouldn't let him rest. He started again. "Dear Evelyn, I'm not good with fancy words like you are, but I needed to tell you something. When my old man died, I thought the pain would kill me too. I rode my bike for days, trying to outrun it. But you can't outrun pain. It rides with you. You told me about that rejection letter, about how they want you to stay in the dark place, writing about fresh grief. But that's not where you are anymore, is it? And that's okay. Remember what I said about strength? It's not just about letting yourself feel the pain. It's about letting yourself heal too. Moving forward doesn't mean leaving the people we loved behind. They ride with us too, just in a different way. Your words in that book of yours helped me more than you know. Now it's time to write new words, about new journeys. Don't let anyone tell you that healing isn't worth writing about. You're stronger than you think. I saw it that night at dinner, even through your tears. Keep writing your truth, wherever it takes you. Luke." He read over the words, fighting the urge to crumple the paper and start over. It wasn't elegant or polished, but it was honest. Maybe that's what mattered most. At the post office the next morning, Luke hesitated one last time before dropping the envelope into the mailbox. The address he'd gotten from their mutual friend who'd set up the blind date stared back at him in his rough handwriting. He didn't expect Evelyn to write back, or even acknowledge the letter. That wasn't why he'd written it. As the letter disappeared into the slot, Luke felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd said what needed saying, offered what comfort he could. The rest was up to her. The letter's impact. Evelyn's morning routine hadn't changed in years. Coffee first, then a quiet moment on her front porch watching the neighborhood come alive. The mail truck's familiar rumble drew her attention as it stopped at her box. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself and walked down the driveway, breathing in the crisp morning air. Bills, advertisements, and then something different. A plain white envelope with rough handwriting she didn't immediately recognize. Her heart skipped when she saw the return address. Luke Thompson. She nearly dropped her other mail. Back inside, Evelyn set her coffee cup down with trembling hands. She hadn't expected to hear from him, especially not like this. A letter seemed so old-fashioned, so personal. The envelope felt heavy in her hands as she carefully opened it, trying not to tear the paper. The yellow legal paper inside bore the marks of someone who didn't write letters often. Slight smudges, uneven lines. But the words themselves stopped her breath. "I'm not good with fancy words like you are." Evelyn sank into her kitchen chair, reading each line slowly. The morning light streamed through her window, catching dust motes in its beam as she absorbed Luke's honest, unpolished words. Her vision blurred as she read about his own loss, his own journey through grief. Her fingers traced over the line about strength and healing. The paper crinkled slightly under her touch. Here was this man, this supposedly tough biker, sharing such vulnerable thoughts with her. His words about her book helping him made her chest tight with emotion. She glanced at her desk in the corner, where her laptop sat closed, untouched since the rejection letter. Her latest manuscript lay in a neat stack beside it, marked with her publisher's harsh comments about maintaining the raw grief that made her first book successful. But Luke's words rang true. She wasn't in that dark place anymore. The pain hadn't vanished, it never would, but it had transformed. Like a boulder in a river, grief had become something she could flow around rather than something that blocked her entirely. Evelyn read the letter again, then a third time. Each reading revealed new layers of meaning, new depths to Luke's simple but profound message. She thought about their dinner together, how his gruff exterior had given way to such genuine empathy. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming her kitchen table where she sat with the letter. Her coffee had gone cold, forgotten. She smoothed the paper with her palms, feeling the indentations of his pen strokes. "Your words in that book of yours helped me more than you know. Now it's time to write new words about new journeys." Evelyn looked at her husband's photo on the wall, his kind eyes seeming to meet hers. For the first time in months, she didn't feel guilty about the idea of moving forward. Luke was right. Moving forward didn't mean leaving loved ones behind. She sat there at her kitchen table, the letter before her, feeling something shift inside. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but rather like a key turning quietly in a long, rusted lock. Luke's raw honesty, his unexpected wisdom delivered in simple, heartfelt words, had touched something deep within her. Her fingers smoothed over the paper one more time as she absorbed the truth in his words. Maybe it was time to write about healing, about hope. Maybe that was exactly what her readers needed, what she needed. The phone call. Evelyn paced her living room, Luke's letter still clutched in her hand. Her cell phone lay on the coffee table, and she kept glancing at it between steps. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her carpet, reminding her how much time she'd spent deliberating. "This is silly," she muttered to herself, smoothing her hair with one hand. "Just make the call." She'd found his number on the return address portion of the envelope. Such a simple thing, really. Just 10 digits. But they felt heavy with meaning, like a code that could unlock something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn settled onto her couch and picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed. 1 ring, 2 rings. She almost hung up on the third. "Hello?" Luke's deep voice answered, catching her off guard despite her preparation. "Luke, this is Evelyn." She cleared her throat, suddenly aware of how dry it felt. "From the other night?" "Evelyn." His voice softened, and she could hear the smile in it. "I was hoping you'd call." She clutched the letter tighter, its edges now soft from her constant handling. "I got your letter this morning. I wanted to thank you. It meant a lot to me." "I'm not much of a writer," he said, a touch of self-consciousness in his voice. "But I meant every word." "That's what made it beautiful," she found herself saying. "It's honesty." There was a pause, comfortable rather than awkward. In the background, she could hear the distant rumble of motorcycles, probably at his garage. "You know," Luke said, "I've read your book 3 times now. Never told anyone that before." A surprised laugh escaped her lips, genuine and warm. "3 times? I don't think even my editor read it that many times." His answering chuckle was rich and deep. "Well, good writing's worth revisiting. Besides, some parts hit pretty close to home." They fell into an easy conversation about books, about grief, about healing. Evelyn found herself sharing stories about her husband that she hadn't told anyone in years. Funny moments, quiet moments, the kind of memories that made her smile instead of cry. "He sounds like he was quite a character," Luke said after she told him about her husband's disastrous attempt at making anniversary dinner. "He was." Evelyn wiped away a tear, but this time it came with a smile. "You would have liked him." "I'm sure I would have." Luke paused, then added, "Hey, I was thinking, would you like to grab coffee sometime? There's this little cafe near my shop. Nothing fancy, just coffee and conversation." Evelyn's heart did a little jump. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Anticipation, maybe. Hope? "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "When were you thinking?" They settled on a time for the next afternoon. As she hung up the phone, Evelyn realized she was still smiling. The letter lay smooth in her lap now, its message of hope and healing feeling more real than ever. She walked to her desk and opened her laptop for the first time since the rejection letter. The cursor blinked at her, but it didn't feel like an accusation anymore. Instead, it felt like an invitation to write something new, something different, something about healing. Standing at her window, she watched the sunset paint the sky in gentle pinks and oranges. Tomorrow she would meet Luke for coffee. The thought made her nervous, yes, but excited too. A feeling she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. The cafe meeting. The small cafe buzzed with afternoon energy as Evelyn pushed open the glass door. The bell above chimed softly, and the rich scent of coffee wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Luke's broad shoulders. He sat at a corner table, his leather jacket draped over the chair beside him. He stood when he saw her, offering a gentle smile that seemed at odds with his tough appearance. "Hey," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "I ordered you a coffee. Hope that's okay?" "That's thoughtful of you." Evelyn settled into the chair, touched by the gesture. A steaming mug of coffee sat before her. The foam swirled into a delicate pattern. "How did you know how I take it?" "Black with 1 sugar," Luke said, sitting back down. "You mentioned it during our date." Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest, and it wasn't from the coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. You have a good memory." "Some things stick," he said with a shrug, but his eyes were kind. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both sipping their drinks. The cafe's ambient noise created a cozy backdrop, the hiss of the espresso machine, quiet conversations, and the gentle clink of cups against saucers. "I've been trying to write," Evelyn said finally, her voice soft. "But every time I sit down at my desk, it's like all the words have dried up." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "The rejection letter just confirmed what I've been afraid of. Maybe I don't have anything left to say." Luke leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "You know what I think?" His voice was gentle but firm. "I think sometimes we get so caught up in what we think we should be saying that we forget what we need to say." Evelyn looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "What do you mean?" "Your first book," he said. "It came from a real place, raw and honest. Maybe instead of trying to write what you think people want to read, you need to write what's in your heart right now." His words struck a chord. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "And what if what's in my heart isn't what people want to hear? Then those aren't your readers." Luke took a sip of his coffee. "The people who need your words will find them. Trust me, I'm living proof of that." Evelyn smiled, remembering how this tough biker had found solace in her words. "Your letter," she said. "It really helped me, made me feel less alone." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's been months since I felt like I could keep going, but something about your words. They gave me hope." Luke's face softened, and a proud smile tugged at his lips. "Sometimes we all need someone to remind us we're stronger than we think." Evelyn nodded, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Thank you, Luke. Not just for the letter, but for this. For listening. For understanding." His smile widened, genuine and warm, pride evident in his expression. He didn't need to say anything. His presence and support spoke volumes. The growing bond. As autumn settled over the city, Luke and Evelyn fell into a comfortable routine. Every Wednesday and Saturday afternoon, they'd meet at the same corner table in the cafe. The staff grew used to their presence, the unlikely pair of a leather-clad biker and the elegant writer who shared quiet conversations over steaming mugs of coffee. "You should have seen their faces," Luke chuckled one afternoon, sharing a story about his fellow bikers discovering his newfound appreciation for literature. "Big Mike nearly fell off his bike when he caught me reading poetry during our lunch break." Evelyn laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "I suppose bikers aren't known for their literary pursuits?" "Not usually," Luke admitted, grinning. "But you've opened my eyes to a whole new world." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "Speaking of which, how's the writing going?" Evelyn's face brightened. "Better, actually. I've been working on something new." She pulled out a small notebook from her purse. Would you mind if I read you a paragraph?" "I'd be honored," Luke said, settling back in his chair. As weeks passed, their friendship deepened. Luke found himself looking forward to their meetings, enjoying the way Evelyn's eyes lit up when she talked about her latest writing breakthrough. He'd listen intently, offering simple but honest feedback that seemed to help her more than any professional critique. One particularly challenging day, Evelyn called Luke, her voice tight with stress. "I have this deadline," she explained, "but my car's in the shop, and I need to pick up some research materials from the library." "Say no more," Luke interrupted, already reaching for his keys. "I'll be there in 20. He showed up on his motorcycle, holding out a spare helmet to her. Evelyn hesitated for just a moment before laughing and taking it. "My first time on a motorcycle," she admitted, climbing on behind him. "Don't worry," he assured her. "I'll take it easy." Their friendship settled into a comfortable rhythm. Luke would sometimes bring her groceries when she was too absorbed in writing to remember to eat. Evelyn, in turn, would share her latest chapters with him, valuing his straightforward perspective. "You don't sugarcoat things," she told him one day as they sat in her study, manuscripts spread across her desk. "It's refreshing." Luke smiled, helping her organize the papers. "That's what friends are for." The word friends felt right to both of them. There was no awkwardness, no pressure for anything more. Instead, they found something rare and precious, a connection that helped them both heal in different ways. One Saturday, as Luke helped Evelyn carry her research materials back to her house, she paused at her door. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for that blind date." Luke nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Me too," he replied simply. "Who would have thought a Hell's Angel and a writer would end up being such good friends?" Evelyn smiled, unlocking her door. Sometimes the best friendships come from the most unexpected places. As she settled at her desk to write, Luke quietly made coffee in her kitchen, both of them comfortable in their shared silence. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the scene. Two unlikely friends, each finding strength in the other's presence. The setback. Evelyn stared at her phone, reading the rejection email for the 5th time. The words blurred together, but their meaning remained painfully clear. "We regret to inform you that your proposal does not meet our current needs." She let the phone slip from her fingers onto the bedspread. The morning sun filtered through her curtains, but she couldn't bring herself to get up. What was the point? This was her second rejection, and the weight of failure pressed heavily on her chest. Her bedroom felt like a sanctuary and a prison all at once. Family photos lined the walls, memories of happier times with her late husband. He'd always believed in her writing, always encouraged her to keep going. But now, without him, the words seemed hollow. Evelyn pulled the covers up to her chin, feeling tears well up in her eyes. The clock on her nightstand showed 2:30 p.m., but time had lost all meaning. She'd been in bed since reading the email at 7 a.m., ignoring calls and messages. Her laptop sat untouched on her desk, the manuscript she'd been working on now seeming pointless. "Maybe I'm fooling myself," she whispered to the empty room. "Maybe I should just stop writing altogether." The thought brought fresh tears. Writing had been her lifeline after losing her husband, her way of processing grief and helping others do the same. But now? Now it felt like she was trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. She reached for the tissue box on her nightstand, knocking over a framed photo. It was from her book signing last year, back when she thought she knew what she was doing, back when her words seemed to matter. The doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. She ignored it, pulling the covers higher. It rang again, more insistent this time. "Evelyn?" Luke's voice carried through the door. "I know you're in there. Your car's outside." She closed her eyes, wishing he would go away. She couldn't face anyone right now, especially not Luke. He'd been so supportive of her writing, and she felt like she'd let him down too. The sound of a key turning in the lock made her eyes snap open. Right, she'd given him a spare key for emergencies. She heard his heavy boots in the hallway, then a gentle knock on her bedroom door. "Go away, Luke," she called out, her voice hoarse from crying. The door creaked open anyway. Luke stood there, holding a paper bag that smelled wonderfully of Chinese food, her favorite from the little place downtown. His leather jacket was slightly damp from the rain she hadn't even noticed was falling. "I brought dinner," he said simply, not commenting on her tear-stained face or the tissues scattered across her bed. Evelyn sat up slowly, watching as he set the bag down on her dresser and pulled up her reading chair next to the bed. He didn't say anything about the rejection, didn't try to fix things with empty words. He just sat there, a solid presence in her storm of emotions. After a long moment of silence, he spoke softly. "You know what makes someone strong?" He didn't wait for her answer. "It's not never falling down, it's getting back up every time you do." Fresh tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks, but these felt different, cleansing somehow. Luke reached into the bag and pulled out a container of her favorite sesame chicken, placing it gently on her lap with a pair of chopsticks. "You don't have to get up right now," he said quietly, "but when you're ready, your words will be waiting." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Evelyn's living room as she sat in her favorite armchair, cradling a cup of tea. The warmth from the ceramic mug seeped into her hands, matching the gentle warmth that had been growing in her heart these past months. She glanced at the empty chair across from her where Luke had sat just hours ago. They'd spent the afternoon talking about everything and nothing, his latest motorcycle restoration project, her memories of her husband, and the small victories they'd both achieved lately. The ease of their friendship still surprised her. Running her finger along the rim of her mug, Evelyn realized something had shifted within her. The crushing weight of grief that had once consumed her days had softened into something more manageable. It wasn't gone. She knew it never would be. But it had transformed into something that felt more like a companion than an enemy. "Things are different now," she whispered to herself, setting down her tea. Her gaze drifted to the photographs on the mantel. Her husband's smile beamed back at her, and for the first time in ages she didn't feel that sharp stab of pain. Instead, she felt grateful for the love they'd shared, for the memories that would always be part of her story. Luke's friendship had shown her that healing wasn't about forgetting or replacing what was lost. It was about making room for new experiences while honoring the past. His quiet strength and unexpected wisdom had helped her see that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the cornerstone of genuine connection. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window, watching the neighborhood children playing in the street. Their laughter floated up to her second-floor apartment, reminding her of the simple joys that still existed in the world. She'd been so focused on what she'd lost that she'd forgotten about all the possibilities that remained. The rejection letters from publishers didn't seem as devastating anymore. They were just part of the journey, not the end of it. Luke had shown her that by simply believing in her, by showing up with Chinese food when she needed it most, by listening without trying to fix everything. She turned and looked at her writing desk, tucked into the corner of the room. Dust had gathered on its surface. She'd been avoiding it since the last rejection. But now, something pulled her toward it. Her fingers traced the worn wood, remembering all the hours she'd spent here pouring her heart onto paper. The desk had been a gift from her husband, chosen specifically because he knew she needed a special place to write. He'd always believed in her stories, always encouraged her to share them with the world. And now, with Luke's steady friendship supporting her, she felt ready to honor that belief again. Evelyn pulled out the chair and sat down, the familiar creaks of the wood welcoming her back. She opened the drawer and took out her favorite pen, the one she'd used to sign her first book contract. Its weight felt right in her hand, like greeting an old friend. The blank page before her no longer seemed intimidating. Instead, it looked like an invitation, a fresh start. She didn't need to have all the answers or know exactly where the story would go. She just needed to begin. Evelyn took a deep breath and positioned her pen over the paper. The words were there, waiting patiently for her to find them again. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly ready to write, not just about loss and grief, but about hope, friendship, and the unexpected ways that healing could find its way into a broken heart. The evening sun painted long shadows across the park's winding paths as Luke walked alone, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. He'd left his motorcycle at home today, needing the quiet of a solitary walk to sort through his thoughts. The leather jacket he usually wore like armor felt different now, less like protection, and more like a familiar comfort. Children played on the swings nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Luke watched them for a moment, remembering how he used to put up walls between himself and such simple, joyful moments. Before meeting Evelyn, he'd kept the world at arm's length, convinced that's what being strong meant. He sat down on a weathered wooden bench, running a hand through his hair. The past few months had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. The tough exterior he'd built up over years in the Hells Angels, the one that had served him so well, was softening around the edges. Who would have thought? He muttered to himself, shaking his head with a slight smile. Here he was, a hardened biker, finding himself looking forward to coffee dates with a writer who'd shown him what real courage looked like. The sound of skateboard wheels on pavement caught his attention. A teenage boy whizzed past, reminding Luke of his younger self, always moving, never stopping long enough to feel anything too deeply. But Evelyn had changed that. Their conversations, her willingness to share her pain, her trust in him, it had all sparked something different inside him. Luke pulled out the small notebook he'd started carrying recently. Another change he could trace back to Evelyn's influence. He'd begun jotting down thoughts and feelings, something he would have scoffed at months ago. The pages held his scattered reflections, bits and pieces of his own story he'd never dared to examine before. A cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and Luke closed his eyes, letting the evening air wash over him. He thought about how easily he could talk to Evelyn now, how natural it felt to share parts of himself he'd kept hidden for so long. With her, he didn't have to be the tough guy all the time. She saw past that, accepted him as he was. The realization hit him like a gentle wave. He'd been wrong about strength all along. It wasn't about being untouchable or unfeeling. Real strength was having the courage to be seen, to be known. Evelyn had taught him that without even trying. Luke stood up, stretching his legs as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. He thought about the cafe where they often met, where their unlikely friendship had grown over countless cups of coffee. He needed to see her, to talk about these changes he was experiencing. Pulling out his phone, he typed a quick message to Evelyn, asking to meet at their usual spot. His thumb hovered over the send button for just a moment before pressing it. There was no hesitation now, no worry about appearing weak. He understood that this vulnerability he'd been so afraid of wasn't a flaw. It was the key to becoming stronger than he'd ever been. As Luke walked toward the park exit, his steps felt lighter. He was ready to face these emotions head-on, to embrace this new understanding of himself. The path ahead seemed clearer now, even if it meant letting go of old habits and beliefs. The cafe buzzed with its usual afternoon energy as Evelyn sat at their regular corner table, 2 steaming cups of coffee waiting. Her hands were wrapped around her mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. Through the window, she watched Luke park his motorcycle and remove his helmet. She smiled, remembering how intimidating that sight had been on their first meeting. The bell above the door chimed as Luke walked in, his leather jacket creaking softly as he made his way to their table. His face softened when he saw her, the tough biker exterior melting into something gentler. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." Evelyn pushed his coffee toward him. "I ordered your usual. Still black as night, right?" Luke chuckled, taking a sip. "Some things never change." He paused, studying her face. "But other things do, don't they?" They certainly do, Evelyn agreed, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. You know, when we first met, I never would have guessed we'd end up here. That blind date could have gone so differently. Yeah, who'd have thought a Hell's Angel and a writer would become such good friends? Luke's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Luke, Evelyn began, her voice soft but steady. I need to thank you. These past few months, when my publisher rejected my book, when I felt like giving up, you were there. You didn't try to fix everything or tell me it would all be okay. You just stayed. Luke shifted in his seat, unused to such direct appreciation. Anyone would have done the same. No, Evelyn shook her head. They wouldn't have. You saw me at my lowest and didn't run away. That meant everything. The cafe's ambient noise filled the momentary silence between them. A barista called out orders, dishes clinked, and conversations hummed around them. You know, Luke said, his voice rougher than usual. I've been thinking about everything too, about how different things are now. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, mirroring Evelyn's earlier gesture. I spent so many years thinking I had to be tough all the time. The bike, the leather, the attitude, it was all armor. Evelyn listened intently, giving him space to find his words. But being around you, he continued, watching how you face your grief head on, how you pour it into your writing, it made me realize something. Luke took a deep breath. Being vulnerable isn't weak. It's probably the bravest thing anyone can do. That means a lot coming from you, Evelyn said softly. I mean it, Luke insisted. Look at us now. You're writing again, facing those rejections but not letting them stop you. And me? He gestured to himself with a slight laugh. I'm sitting here talking about feelings without wanting to hop on my bike and ride away. We've both come a long way, haven't we? Evelyn smiled warmly. We have, Luke agreed. And I'm proud of that. Proud of how far we've come, not just as friends, but as people. You helped me see that being tough isn't about hiding everything away. Sometimes it's about letting people in. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. We helped each other heal, I think, in our own ways. Evelyn sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen. The manuscript was complete, polished, and ready to be sent. Her finger hovered over the mouse, but she couldn't quite click submit. Sunlight streamed through her home office window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Her phone buzzed, a text from Luke. You got this. She smiled, remembering their conversation at the cafe yesterday. Her gaze drifted to her husband's photograph on the desk, then back to her phone. Two sources of strength, so different yet equally important in her life. The doorbell rang, making her jump. She opened the door to find Luke standing there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her one. Figured you'd be stalling. Evelyn accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. Am I that predictable? Nah, Luke said, following her inside. Just know how important this is to you. He was wearing his usual leather jacket, but his presence had become comforting rather than intimidating. They walked to her office, where her laptop screen still showed the submission form. Luke leaned against the doorframe, taking a sip of his coffee. You've been working on this for months, he said. It's good work, Evelyn, really good. But what if they reject it again? She sat down at her desk, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. Luke shook his head. Then they reject it. Doesn't change how far you've come. He gestured at the manuscript. This book isn't just about grief anymore. It's about healing, about finding strength in unexpected places. You lived that story. We both did, Evelyn said softly. Exactly. Luke pulled up a chair next to her. Remember what you told me last week? About how writing this book felt different? Evelyn nodded. It did. Before, I was writing from inside the pain. This time... She paused, considering her words. This time, I'm writing about the journey through it. That's what makes it special, Luke said. You're not just telling people about grief anymore. You're showing them there's a way forward. Evelyn took a deep breath, looking at the screen again. The submission form waited patiently for her input. You know what's funny, she said, straightening in her chair. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified of this moment. But now... She looked at Luke, then at her husband's photo. Now I know I can handle whatever comes next. Because you're stronger than you think, Luke said. Always have been. Evelyn began filling out the form, her fingers moving with growing confidence across the keyboard. She attached her manuscript file, double-checking everything one last time. You've been through worse, Luke reminded her gently. And look at you now. Evelyn nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She clicked submit before she could second-guess herself. The confirmation message appeared on screen, and she let out a long breath. It's done, she said, leaning back in her chair. How do you feel? Luke asked. Evelyn thought for a moment, surprised by her own calm. Relieved, actually. And you know what? Whether they accept it or not, it doesn't matter as much as it used to. Writing this book helped me heal. That's what matters. Luke smiled, a proud look in his eyes. Now that's the Evelyn I know. She stood up, feeling lighter than she had in months. The manuscript was out of her hands now, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The journey had changed her, made her stronger, and no rejection could take that away. Luke sat on his motorcycle in the early morning light, the engine silent beneath him. The parking lot of his usual hangout was empty, except for a few other bikes. He ran his hand along the chrome handlebars, feeling the cool metal under his fingers. The past 6 months had changed him. His conversations with Evelyn kept playing in his mind, especially the ones about finding strength in vulnerability. The leather vest he wore, decorated with his Hell's Angels patches, felt heavier than usual today. He pulled out his phone and looked at Evelyn's latest text. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose a different path. The words hit home. Luke had been with the club for years, finding family and protection when he needed it most. But now, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges, he realized he'd outgrown that life. Inside the clubhouse, a few early risers were already gathered around the pool table. The familiar smell of cigarettes and stale beer filled the air. Snake, one of the older members, nodded at him. "You're here early, brother," Snake said, chalking his pool cue. Luke settled into a worn leather chair, watching the morning light filter through the dusty windows. "Been thinking a lot lately." "About that writer lady?" Snake asked, lining up his shot. "About everything." Luke pulled off his leather vest and held it in his hands, studying the patches he'd earned over the years. Each one told a story. But maybe it was time for a new chapter. "The club's been good to me, but..." Snake missed his shot and turned to face Luke. "But you're ready to move on?" Luke nodded slowly, surprised by Snake's understanding tone. "Yeah, I think I am." "Been watching you change these past few months," Snake said, leaning against the pool table. "Saw it coming, if I'm honest. You've been different since you met her." "It's not just about Evelyn," Luke said, though he knew she'd played a part. "I've been feeling stuck, like I'm playing a role that doesn't fit anymore." Snake put down his pool cue and pulled up a chair. "Listen, kid. Club life isn't for everyone forever. Some of us stay, some move on. No shame in choosing your own path." Luke looked around the clubhouse, taking in the familiar sights, the neon beer signs, the photos on the walls, the memories of late nights and wild rides. But now he saw something else, too. The limitations, the expectations, the walls he'd built around himself. "I need to figure out who I am without all this," Luke said, gesturing to his vest. "Takes guts to admit that," Snake replied. "More guts than staying sometimes." Luke stood up, his decision crystallizing in his mind. He carefully folded his vest and placed it on the table. "I need to talk to the president. Start the process." Snake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He'll be here this afternoon. You sure about this?" "Yeah," Luke said, feeling lighter already. "For the first time in a long time, I'm sure about something." He walked to the window, watching the morning sun climb higher in the sky. The world outside seemed bigger somehow, full of possibilities he hadn't let himself see before. The thought of leaving the club still scared him, but he remembered what he'd told Evelyn months ago. Strength doesn't come from being tough. It comes from letting yourself feel. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Evelyn. "Taking your advice, time for a change." The reply came quickly. "Proud of you." Luke smiled, tucking his phone away. He'd spent years building walls around himself, wearing toughness like armor. Now it was time to see what lay beyond those walls. Evelyn sat at her desk, staring at the manuscript she'd been editing when her phone rang. The publisher's name flashed on the screen, making her heart skip a beat. She took a deep breath, remembering Luke's words about facing challenges head-on. "Hello?" Her voice was steady, despite her trembling hands. "Evelyn," her publisher said, his tone warmer than usual. "I've just finished reading your latest submission." She gripped the edge of her desk, bracing herself. The morning sun streamed through her office window, casting a gentle glow on her late husband's photograph. She'd written this book with both grief and hope in her heart. And now the moment of truth had arrived. "I have to say," the publisher continued, "this is some of your best work yet. The raw emotion, the journey through grief to healing, it's exactly what we've been looking for. We'd like to move forward with publication." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes. "Really?" she whispered. "Yes, really. The way you've captured the process of healing, especially that chapter about unexpected friendships, it's powerful stuff, Evelyn. Your readers are going to connect with this on a deep level." She looked around her office, at the sticky notes covered with ideas, the coffee cups that had kept her going through late-night writing sessions, and the small note card from Luke that read, "You've got this," propped against her computer screen. "Thank you," she managed, wiping her eyes. "This means so much to me." After discussing the details and ending the call, Evelyn sat in silence for a moment. She remembered those dark days when she'd thought she'd never write again, when the rejection letters had felt like confirmation of her deepest fears. Now here she was, accepted and validated, but more importantly, proud of herself for not giving up. She reached for her phone again, scrolling to Luke's number. Their friendship had been such an unexpected gift, born from that tearful blind date that now felt like a lifetime ago. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Hey, what's up?" Luke asked, the sound of his motorcycle engine cutting off in the background. "It's happening, Luke," Evelyn said, her voice full of emotion. "The publisher just called. They're taking the book." "That's fantastic." His enthusiasm was genuine and warm. "I knew you could do it, Evelyn. You've worked so hard for this." She smiled, remembering all the times he'd sat with her while she worked, bringing her coffee and offering quiet encouragement. "I couldn't have done it without you, you know. You helped me find my strength again when I thought I'd lost it forever." "Nah," Luke said softly. "The strength was always there. You just needed someone to remind you of that." Evelyn looked at her husband's photo, feeling a peaceful acceptance wash over her. "When you saw me crying that first night, did you ever think we'd end up here?" Luke chuckled. Honestly, I was just trying to figure out how to stop you from crying, but I'm glad we did end up here. You deserve this win, Evelyn. We should celebrate, she said, running her fingers over the manuscript's pages. Coffee at our usual spot? You bet. First round's on me. Give me 20 minutes? Evelyn agreed, and after hanging up, she stood by her window, watching the world go by outside. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in grief and self-doubt. Now she felt stronger than ever, ready to share her story with others who might need to hear it. She picked up her purse, ready to meet her friend and celebrate this milestone, grateful for the unexpected turns life could take. The bell above the cafe door chimed as Evelyn walked in, spotting Luke at their usual corner table. He'd already ordered their favorites, a chamomile tea for her and black coffee for himself. The familiar scent of fresh-baked pastries and coffee beans filled the air, reminding her of all the conversations they'd shared in this very spot. Look who's finally a published author again, Luke said with a warm smile, standing up to give her a quick hug. Evelyn sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. And look who's finally embracing his softer side, she teased, noting how Luke had traded his leather jacket for a simple denim one. Yeah, well, he shrugged, but his eyes were bright. Some wise author once wrote about the importance of change. They shared a knowing look, remembering that first awkward blind date that had brought them here. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting a golden glow over their table. You know, Evelyn said, stirring her tea thoughtfully, when I walked into that restaurant and saw you sitting there in your Hell's Angels jacket, I almost turned around and left. Luke chuckled. And when I saw you crying, I wanted to run for the hills. Who knew that moment would change everything? You said something that night that stuck with me, Evelyn recalled. Strength doesn't come from being tough, it comes from letting yourself feel. I've used that line in my new book, you know. Gave you credit in the acknowledgments. Luke's face reddened slightly. Never thought I'd see my name in a book. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. You helped me too, Evelyn. Made me realize I was hiding behind that tough guy image. Now I'm actually thinking about counseling, helping other guys who've been through rough times. That's wonderful, Luke, Evelyn said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. You have such a gift for understanding people. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other customers come and go. The cafe had become their sanctuary over the past months, a place where they could both be completely themselves. I start my counseling courses next month, Luke said. Might not be around as much. And my book tour starts in a few weeks, Evelyn added. I'll be traveling quite a bit. Their eyes met, and they both understood what the other was thinking. Things were changing, but the foundation they'd built remained strong. You know, Luke said, I never thought I'd say this, but you're one of my best friends, Evelyn. And you're mine, she replied, her voice soft with emotion. Who would have thought a blind date could lead to something so much better than romance? Luke nodded, a gentle smile playing on his lips. We'll still have our coffee dates when we're both in town? Absolutely, Evelyn said firmly. And you better keep me updated on your studies. I want to hear all about your journey. Deal, Luke agreed. And I expect signed copies of all your future books. They shared another smile, both feeling grateful for the unexpected friendship that had helped them heal and grow. The afternoon light was starting to fade, casting long shadows across their table, but neither made a move to leave just yet. They sat there, comfortable in the knowledge that while their paths might diverge, their connection would remain unchanged. The morning sun cast long shadows across Luke's driveway as he secured the last box to his motorcycle. His old leather jacket hung loosely on the handlebars, a reminder of the life he was leaving behind. The chrome of his bike gleamed, freshly polished for his final ride out of town. Evelyn pulled up in her car, parking beside the curb. She stepped out holding 2 paper cups from their favorite cafe. "Couldn't let you leave without one last coffee," she said, handing him the steaming cup. Luke accepted it with a grateful smile. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Of course I did." She looked at his packed bike. "Got everything?" "Yeah, just the essentials. The rest is already at my new place." He took a sip of coffee, savoring the familiar taste. "The counseling program starts next week. Still can't believe I'm doing this." "I can," Evelyn said firmly. "You've always had it in you, Luke. You just needed to believe it yourself." They walked around his bike, inspecting his packing job. The morning was quiet, except for birds chirping and the occasional car passing by. It felt peaceful, right? "Got your new address written down." Evelyn patted her purse. "And you've got mine?" "Memorized it," Luke tapped his temple. "Plus, you're not that hard to find anymore. Your name's right there on the bestseller list." Evelyn laughed, the sound carrying across the empty driveway. "Just don't forget about me when you're a famous counselor." "Not possible," Luke said, his voice soft but certain. "You helped me find my way, Evelyn. I won't forget that." She reached out and straightened his new denim jacket. No patches, no club insignia, just plain blue denim. "We helped each other. That's what friends do." Luke nodded, taking another sip of his coffee. The morning sun had risen higher, warming the air around them. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees. "You know," he said, "I used to think leaving the club would feel like giving up, but it feels more like moving forward." "That's because it is," Evelyn replied. "Just like when I started writing again. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose a new path." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts, but content in each other's presence. When the cups were empty, Luke knew it was time. "Well," he said, picking up his helmet. "Guess this is it." "This isn't goodbye, Luke. It's just see you later." He smiled, remembering how far they'd both come since that first blind date. "You're right. Besides, I need to know how your next book turns out." "Oh, you'll get the first signed copy," she promised. "Right after my editor, of course." Luke swung his leg over his bike and started the engine. The familiar rumble filled the morning air, but today it sounded different. Like a beginning, rather than an escape. Evelyn stepped back, giving him space. There were no tears in her eyes, just pride and genuine happiness for her friend. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," he confirmed, pulling on his helmet. Luke gave her one final wave before releasing the clutch. The bike rolled forward, carrying him toward his new life. In his mirrors, he could see Evelyn standing in his driveway, her hand raised in farewell, a soft smile on her face. The morning sun caught her figure, making her glow like a beacon of hope, a reminder of the friendship that had changed both their lives. Sunlight streamed through Evelyn's office window, casting a warm glow across her wooden desk. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she took in the familiar comfort of her writing space. The walls around her held memories, framed book covers, cherished photographs, and now a small Polaroid of her and Luke at their favorite cafe. She glanced at her late husband's photo on the corner of her desk. His smile, frozen in time, seemed different now, less a reminder of loss and more a gentle blessing for her future. She touched the frame lightly, the way she always did before starting a new project. "You'd like him, you know," she whispered to the photograph. "Luke helped me remember how to be strong, just like you always wanted." Her computer hummed softly as she opened a new document. The blank page didn't frighten her anymore. Instead, it felt like an invitation, a fresh canvas waiting for her story. She'd spent so long writing about grief and loss, necessary stories that had helped others heal. But now, she felt ready for something different. Evelyn reached for her favorite mug, the one Luke had given her before he left. It was simple, with just one word printed on it: strength. Steam rose from her tea in lazy spirals as she settled deeper into her chair. The morning light shifted, creating patterns on her desk. Outside, a bird sang, its melody drifting through the partially open window. The world felt full of possibility, like it had on that unexpected evening when a tough-looking biker had shown her what true empathy looked like. She smiled, remembering how wrong her first impressions had been. Luke's leather jacket and tattoos had hidden one of the gentlest souls she'd ever known. Their friendship had taught her that healing doesn't always come in expected packages, and that sometimes the best connections grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Her fingers found the keys, and she began to type. The hardest part about healing isn't the pain. It's allowing yourself to feel it. For years, I thought strength meant building walls, holding back tears, keeping my grief locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Then a stranger with kind eyes and a leather jacket taught me otherwise. The words flowed easily now, like a river finding its natural course. Evelyn paused, taking a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest. She thought about all the people who might read these words, who might recognize themselves in her story. People who, like her, needed to learn that vulnerability wasn't weakness. She looked at the last text message from Luke on her phone. "Don't forget, you've got this." He'd sent it just yesterday, somehow knowing she was starting her new book today. Even miles away, their connection remained strong, a testament to the power of true friendship. Evelyn turned back to her screen, her heart full and her mind clear. The cursor blinked steadily as she continued typing, each word a step forward on her journey. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a bridge to others who needed to hear what she'd learned. The morning grew brighter as she worked, but she barely noticed the time passing. The words came naturally, honest and raw, filled with the wisdom she'd gained. Finally, she reached the opening paragraph's last line, the truth that had changed everything for her. Her fingers moved deliberately across the keys. Strength comes from letting yourself feel.